I travel for work. I want to start there because it matters. Not the exotic kind of travel, not conferences in interesting cities or client dinners at places worth remembering. The other kind. The kind where you drive 2 hours on a motorway to a town you have never thought about and will not think about again. Stay 1 or 2 nights in whatever hotel the company booking system selects based on price and proximity. Eat something forgettable from room service and drive home. I have done this probably 100 times in the past 6 years. 100 different rooms, 100 different beds, 100 different shower pressures and blackout curtains that never quite meet in the middle, and televisions that default to a volume slightly too loud when you turn them on. You stop noticing things when you travel that much. That is the honest truth of it. You stop registering the details of a room because the details don't matter. You are there to sleep and leave. The room is a function, not a place. That is why it took me as long as it did to notice, because I had trained myself over 6 years and 100 rooms to not pay attention. My name is Jamie. I'm 38. I work in technical sales for a company that makes industrial components that I will not bore you with the specifics of. I am not a dramatic person. I am not, as my wife Claire would tell you with affectionate accuracy, particularly imaginative. I deal in the concrete and the measurable, and I have always found this to be a reasonable way to move through a life. I tell you this so you understand what it means when I say that what happened in that hotel room in November changed something in me that has not fully changed back. The town was called Ashford. I had been there once before, 2 years earlier, for a similar visit to a similar client. I remembered almost nothing about it except that the ring road had roadworks and the coffee at the client's office was bad. The hotel was a mid-range chain, the kind with a loyalty program you'd join and forget about. 4 floors, about 80 rooms, a bar that closed at 11, a breakfast that ran until 9:30. I had stayed in 20 hotels exactly like it. The room was on the 3rd floor, number 312, facing the car park. I arrived on a Tuesday evening around 7. Checked in at the front desk. A young man whose name tag said Marcus got my key card, found the lift, found the room, let myself in. The room was exactly what it was supposed to be. Double bed, desk by the window, small bathroom, television on the wall, kettle and the little basket of tea bags and coffee sachets on the sideboard. The curtains were the heavy blackout kind in a dark blue. The carpet was the particular pattern that hotel carpets have always had and will apparently always have. I put my bag on the luggage rack. I took off my shoes. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, the way you do when you arrive somewhere and you need a few seconds to register that you have arrived. The room smelled clean, slightly chemical, the way hotel rooms do after housekeeping. Fresh linen, the faint trace of whatever cleaning product they use on the bathroom tiles. I ordered room service, ate at the desk, watched something on my laptop, went to sleep before 11. The first night was entirely ordinary. It was the second evening when I found it. I had come back from the client visit around 5. The meeting had gone reasonably well, the kind of reasonably well that means you will need to come back in 3 months and do it again, but no one is unhappy. I was tired in the specific way of a day spent being professionally pleasant, which is a different kind of tired from physical exhaustion. The kind that sits behind your eyes. I had a shower. I stood under the water for longer than necessary because the pressure was actually good, which is rarer than it should be. I dried off, and I stood at the bathroom sink, and I opened my toiletry bag to get my toothbrush, and I noticed the shelf above the sink. It was a glass shelf, the kind you find in hotel bathrooms, mounted between the mirror and the tiled wall. Intended for the guests' things: toothbrush, razor, whatever you set out when you're staying somewhere. On the shelf, pushed to the back left corner, was something that was not mine and was not the hotel's. A watch? A man's watch. Simple face, brown leather strap. The kind of watch that is not expensive but is not cheap either. The kind that someone wears every day and takes off at night. It was sitting face up on the glass shelf, slightly toward the back, in the way that something sits when it has been set down without much thought and not picked up again. I stood and looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it up. The strap was slightly worn at the buckle hole, the way leather wears when it's been used at the same setting for a long time. The watch face was clean, the glass unscratched. The hands had stopped. Whatever battery had been keeping it running had died while it sat on that shelf. The hands were stopped at 4:17. I looked at the watch for a moment more. Then I set it down, got my toothbrush, brushed my teeth, and went back into the room. I was going to call the front desk. Tell them there was a watch left behind by a previous guest. Could someone come and collect it? That was my intention. And then I noticed the notebook. I had not seen it the night before. That is the thing I keep coming back to. I had been in that room for a full evening, unpacked, eaten, sat at the desk, moved around the space for several hours, and I had not seen it. It was on the desk, a small notebook, the kind with a black card cover, the size of a paperback, sitting on the right side of the desk surface, partially behind the hotel's information folder, which is why I might have missed it the evening before. Partially hidden. I picked it up. The cover had nothing written on it. I opened it. The first several pages were filled with handwriting. Not every page, some had a few lines, some were full, some had only a date and then nothing, but filled in the way a personal journal is filled. Not neat, not formatted. The handwriting of someone writing quickly and privately. I knew I should not read it. It was not mine. It was private. The correct thing to do was to set it down and call the front desk and report it along with the watch. I read the first page. I am not going to read you every entry from the notebook. I want to be clear about that. Some of what was in it was deeply personal in ways that I don't think are mine to share. But I need to tell you the shape of it, because the shape of it is what matters. The entries were dated. They started 3 weeks before I arrived in that room. The person writing, a man, I understood quickly from the way he wrote about himself, was staying in the hotel. Extended stay, I gathered from the early entries. Something to do with work. Something that had extended beyond its original timeline and kept him there longer than he had planned. His name was in the first entry. He had written it as a kind of header, the way people sometimes start a new journal with their name as if anchoring it. The name was Gary. The early entries were ordinary. The boredom of an extended hotel stay. The food. The noise from the car park. The uncomfortable angle of the desk chair. The entry on the 5th day said simply, "The chair is going to kill my back before this project does." I smiled slightly at that because it was exactly the kind of thing I would write. Gary wrote the way I think a lot of working men in their 40s write when no one is looking. Without performance, directly, with small complaints and smaller observations and the occasional moment of something more considered that appeared and then retreated quickly, as if he had nearly said something real and caught himself. He wrote about missing his daughter. Her name was Beth. She was 7, and he described a phone call with her, in which she had insisted on telling him, in very serious and thorough detail, about a drawing she had done of a horse. He said the call had taken 45 minutes and that it had been the best 45 minutes of the week. I set the notebook down for a moment when I read that. Then I picked it up again. The entries changed around the 2nd week. I don't mean they became dramatic. I mean the texture changed. Something in the way Gary was writing shifted, became more interior, more preoccupied. The small complaints about the room fell away and were replaced by something harder to characterize. He wrote about not sleeping well, about waking at certain hours and being unable to locate, in the dark, exactly what had woken him. He wrote about the room feeling different at night than during the day, not in a way he could point to, not a specific thing. Just a quality of the space that changed when the lights were off. An atmosphere, he wrote, which was the kind of word he immediately walked back from by writing, and I know how that sounds. He wrote about hearing something on the 3rd night of bad sleep. Something in the wall, he said. That was not the pipes. He had stayed in enough hotels to know pipe sounds the knock and gurgle of old plumbing, and this was not that. This was quieter, more patient, he wrote. It sounds like something waiting. Then on the next line, which is an insane thing to write in a notebook in a hotel room at 3 a.m. I liked Gary. Reading him, I felt the particular warmth of recognizing someone, the way they talked themselves out of what they were feeling and then couldn't quite manage it. The next entry was 3 days later, shorter than usual. It said, "I haven't been out of the room since Tuesday. I'm not sure why. It doesn't feel right to leave. I put the notebook down. I stood up from the desk and I walked to the window and I looked at the car park below. The flat, mundane view of a hotel car park on a November evening. Wet tarmac, yellow overhead lights, a row of ordinary cars. I thought about what I was reading. I tried to approach it practically. Gary was someone who had been in this room before me. He had left a notebook and a watch, which meant he had left in a hurry or he had left confused. He had clearly been in a difficult state mentally toward the end of his stay, isolated himself, not been sleeping, developed an anxiety about leaving the room that was almost certainly the product of extended isolation and stress, and the particular psychological compression that small spaces produce over time. That was the explanation, practical and complete. I went back to the desk. I opened the notebook to where I had stopped. The entry after "I don't feel right to leave" was dated 2 days later and was unlike anything else in the notebook. It was not written in Gary's usual hand. The same pen, the same ink, but the handwriting was different, larger, less controlled. The letters formed with a pressure that had gone through the page slightly in places. It said, "There is someone else in this room. Then I have checked and there is no one. I have checked twice." Then lower on the page, as if written after a gap of time, "I keep checking." The next entry was the following day. Normal handwriting again. Measured and deliberate, the way you write when you are actively trying to be calm. It said, "I think I need to leave. I have been here for 19 days and I think I have lost perspective on some things. I'm going to check out in the morning. I'm going to call Beth on the way home." That was the last entry with a date. Below it, undated, in the larger pressured handwriting from before were 4 words. "I didn't leave yet." I sat at the desk in room 312 of that hotel in Ashford, and I held Gary's notebook and I read those 4 words several times. "I didn't leave yet." The watch on the bathroom shelf. Hand stopped at 4:17. Set down and not picked up. A man who had been in this room for at least 19 days, who had decided to check out in the morning and call his daughter on the way home, and then hadn't left. I called the front desk. Marcus answered. I told him I had found some items in the room that appeared to have been left by a previous guest, a notebook and a watch. I asked if they had a record of who had stayed in this room most recently before me. There was a pause. He said he would need to check. He came back after a minute and said that the previous guest in room 312 had been a long-term stay. He said the guest had checked out just before I arrived. I asked when exactly. He said Sunday. I had arrived Tuesday. I asked if the guest had checked out in person or if it had been a remote checkout. Another pause. He said it had been processed as a remote checkout. Through the app. I asked if that was common for long-term guests. He said it happened sometimes. I thanked him and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. Remote checkout. Through the app. Meaning no one at the front desk had seen Gary leave. Meaning the checkout had been processed digitally, which anyone could do from anywhere at any time. Meaning there was no actual evidence that Gary had left the building. I slept badly that night. I want to be honest about that. I lay in the bed in room 312 and I listened to the room around me and I thought about a man who had lain in the same bed and listened to something in the wall that sounded to him like something waiting. And I heard the pipes and I heard the distant sound of a car on the road outside, and I heard the particular settling quiet of a building at 2 in the morning. And at 4:15 I heard something, coming from the bathroom. A sound that I lay still and listened to for a full minute before I could identify it. The sound of a tap being turned on and then off. I did not get up. I lay in the dark and I listened, and the sound did not come again, and at some point I fell asleep without deciding to. In the morning I went into the bathroom. The tap was dry, no sign that water had run recently. The shelf above the sink was empty. I had moved Gary's watch to the bedside table the night before. The watch was gone. I searched the entire room. Every surface, every drawer, the floor on both sides of the bed, the bathroom, the wardrobe, the watch was gone. I checked out that morning, in person. I stood at the desk and I looked at Marcus and I said I needed to ask him something directly. I asked him if anything unusual had ever been reported about room 312. He looked at me for a moment. He said he couldn't discuss other guests. I said I understood that. I said I was asking about the room, not the guests, whether the room had ever had any reports associated with it. He looked at me for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, that I should probably ask to be put in a different room next time I stayed with him. I thanked him. I got in my car. I called Claire on the way home, and I talked to her for the whole 2-hour drive. Not about the room, just talked. About nothing. About Beth, who is not my daughter but is my wife's niece and who I am fond of, who had recently become very interested in drawing horses. I talked and I drove, and the morning was gray and ordinary, and I was very glad to be moving through it. I have not stayed in that hotel since. I have thought about Gary many times. I found his name in the notebook. Full name in that first entry. I am not going to share it here. But I looked it up when I got home, the way you look things up when a question won't leave you alone. I found very little. A LinkedIn profile, last active around the time of the notebook's early entries, and a post on a community forum from someone who identified herself as his wife, posted about a month after I found the notebook. She was asking if anyone had heard from him. She said he had gone on a work trip and she was having trouble reaching him. She said his daughter missed him. She said his name was Gary. I don't know what happened in room 312. I am a practical person and I have tried to hold on to that. I have tried to find the version of events that makes complete and ordinary sense. Gary had a breakdown, the isolation and the stress and the sleeplessness tipped something over. He left the room in a confused state and went somewhere and hasn't been in touch with his family since. It happens. People disappear into their own private crises. The watch was knocked off the table by me in the night and rolled somewhere I didn't find. The tap turned on and off because old hotel plumbing does things. I hold all of this, but I keep coming back to one thing. The notebook, the last dated entry. I think I need to leave, going to check out in the morning. And then below it, in different handwriting, undated, I didn't leave yet. And the watch on the shelf stopped at 4:17. And Marcus telling me to ask for a different room next time. And Gary's wife on a forum asking if anyone had heard from him. And a little girl who liked to draw horses. I don't know what happened in room 312, but I know that Gary was there before me. And I know that something of him remained. And on some nights when I'm in a hotel room somewhere on a motorway town I won't remember, and the building settles into its 4 a.m. quiet, I think about what he wrote. It sounds like something waiting. And I make sure the bathroom door is open so I can see the shelf above the sink from where I'm lying. Just to check. Just to be sure it's empty. This has been the Dark Whisper. Sleep well tonight. And if you ever find something in a hotel room that doesn't belong to you, leave it exactly where you found it. Don't read it. Don't ask questions at the front desk. Just call and ask for a different room. And don't look back at 312 when you walk away.